Well, hello, Michelle Moran, and welcome to Authorlink Book Bites.
It's a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Nefertiti is your debut novel, is that right?
Yes, it's the first novel I've published in English. A previous novel of mine entitled Jezebel sold to the parent company of Random House in Germany. And it was translated to German but never sold in America. So Nefertiti is my American debut.
Ah, I see. Well, what inspired you to write about a woman who's been dead for more than 3,000 years?
Well, during my sophomore year in college, I was sitting in a class that was actually called Archaeometrics. I've been telling people that it's called Anthropology 101, but that's not technically correct. And when the professor mentioned that she was looking for volunteers who wanted to join a dig in Israel, I was one of the first students to sign up. When I got to Israel, however, my archaeological dreams seemed to fall to pieces. They were really kind of centered around Indiana Jones.
Oh.
But there were no fedora-wearing men and no cities carved into rock and no Ark of the Covenant. So I was really disappointed. Not only would a fedora seem out of place, but I couldn't even use the little brushes I had packed and bought at Home Depot and wrapped with such care and placed in my bags. And apparently archaeology is more about digging big ditches with pickaxes rather than dusting off little artifacts. And it never occurred to me until then that in order to get to those artifacts, you had to dig pretty deep into the earth. So volunteering on an archaeological dig was hot and it was sweaty and it was dirty. And when I look back on the experience, I think, wow, was that fantastic. And when our team discovered an ancient Egyptian scarab, proving that the Israelites had traded with the Egyptians, I started wondering who owned that scarab and what it had been like to travel from Egypt all the way to this fledgling country of Israel that really had just come about. And when I went home to America, I stopped in Berlin. And I went to the museum where Nefertiti's limestone bust was housed, and I was fascinated. There's the graceful curve of her neck, her brows, this crown that sweeps off her forehead. And I wondered, who is this woman? She looks at you with such power, with such a self-possessed gaze, and she's stunning. And I wanted to know more about her story. So when I began to research into her life, it was really difficult. She'd been a woman who'd inspired powerful emotions when she lived 3,000 years ago, as you mentioned, and the people who hated her had attempted to erase her name from history. As a young girl, Nefertiti had married a pharaoh who erased the gods of Egypt and replaced them with a god that he called Aten. And Aten was a sun god that only Pharaoh and Pharaoh's wife could communicate to. And it seemed that Nefertiti's family allowed her to marry this king, hoping that she would tame his wild ambitions. But what happened instead was that she joined him in building their own capital of Amarna in the desert. And she had a sister. She had a younger sister who seemed to keep her grounded. And in one of the images they found in Amarna, the younger sister is standing off to the side, her arms down, while everybody else is embracing Aten and embracing the royal couple. And I thought, you know, this may be evidence that she did not buy in to what everybody else was buying into. She saw her sister as human versus the goddess that her sister was trying to portray herself as. And the novel took years of research. I went to Egypt. I spoke with Egyptologists. I wanted to be sure that when I wrote it, I was accurate, down to the color of the palace tiles, down to the color of the women's beads. And
so all these people really did live then?
They did. Nefertiti existed. Her father existed. Her aunt, Queen T, existed. And it's based in historical fact.
What was the most difficult thing about writing Nefertiti? And you said it took how long to complete?
It took 2 years. It was a year of research and another 2 years in writing. I was working a full-time job as an English teacher in a high school, which was a fabulous job, but also very time-consuming. I assigned students essays every week, which meant I had 200 essays to grade a week. and I like to give the students immediate feedback. So it was something that I graded immediately, not to mention homework.
So was it just your schedule that was the most difficult thing about it?
Yeah, that. The schedule definitely was difficult, but I'm driven, and it was something that when I got home, even if I was writing until 10:30 at night, I wrote. But actually, I think the most difficult thing about writing Nefertiti was the temptation to keep, I have a great temptation to keep my characters safe. I like people, and I don't like to see them get hurt, even if it's in fiction. So when I sit down to outline a novel, it really takes great force of will to plot a scene where one of my protagonists, or even the antagonists, get hurt. But writing is really about jeopardy. The characters need to be in jeopardy. Their reputations may need to be in jeopardy. Someone they love may need to be in jeopardy. And that's what keeps readers turning the pages, is jeopardy. And because it's historical fiction, it needs to be about the people who really lived and loved. And of course in life, there's jeopardy and people get hurt. So writing about their pain, that's the most difficult for me.
Well, I was amazed at how these characters could live today. I mean, they lived 3,000 years ago, but the way that you portray them, we can relate to them today.
I think it's because jealousy and cunning and ambition, it's timeless. It's absolutely timeless.
Well, now, you have so many characters, so many difficult names. What literary devices did you use to keep them all straight for the reader? And you did, by the way, a beautiful job of that.
Thank you. Yeah, the names are incredibly difficult. I've been getting quite a few emails about that. And my editor said that the sales department called in an absolute panic because they couldn't pronounce Mutnujman's name. When she turned to me for help, I told her, have them pronounce it any way they want.
That's her sister, right?
That's correct.
And she is such a big character in this book. Now, how do you say the name again?
Well, I pronounce it Mutnujmat, but the Egyptians didn't record vowels, so for all we know, her name could have been Mutnujmat. And even if they had recorded vowels, we don't know what they would have sounded like.
But then you gave her a nickname, which I thought was...
That's right. I gave her the nickname Mutney. Mutnujmat simply isn't really a very flattering name to my ear. And Mutney sounded a lot cuter and a lot better. And to be honest, I changed quite a few of the cities' names because I knew that it was going to confuse people. For example, Akhenaten actually isn't a very easy name either. And when he built his city, he called it Akhetaten. And I knew something was going to have to be done because readers could not go through a whole novel saying Akhenaten lived in Akhetaten, which is filed Akhetaten.
That's good.
So what I did was change some of these ancient Egyptian names to modern names, making the city of Akhetaten Amarna, changing Waset, which very few people are familiar with, to its modern-day equivalent of Thebes.
Sure.
And that's how I tried to keep it straight for the reader. I know that there will be quite a few people who will be up in arms that I changed what is historically accurate, but at some point you have to say as a novelist, I'm not writing the biography.
Right.
This is fiction.
Well, Michelle, where did you learn to write such vivid description and really just so vividly?
Oh, gosh. I guess it comes from maybe so much research and travel. Probably my biggest challenge in evoking the 18th dynasty in Egypt was not being able to include all the information I'd researched. There's so many great resources for studying ancient Egypt. And I was really fortunate enough to be in contact with quite a few archaeologists and Egyptologists who were available to answer any questions I had, which couldn't be found in books. So it was a challenge not to include everything. For example, Nefertiti's daughter had her own perfume line, and to me that was fascinating.
Oh, it is fascinating.
Yeah, it meant that there were celebrity figures, even 3,000 years ago, that women at court were trying to emulate. People followed the way she cut her hair, what kind of wig she wore. But some of these facts just didn't have any place in the storyline, so I didn't include it. And I had, like I said before, there's many biographies that exist on Nefertiti, and I had to remember that I was trying to write a compelling fictional narrative and not another biography.
And this is the first fictional work of her, right?
There are others, I believe, that are out of print. I haven't read them, and I don't know, but I thought it was the first. Several readers disabused me of that notion. They said, no, I read a book on her, a fictional book on her in the 50s or the 60s. Honestly, that was before my time.
Right,
and they're not anymore.
It's so beautiful. When you sit down to a blank page, what goes through your mind? Do you know what you're going to write, or does it just flow forth?
I usually know what I'm going to write. I have a very detailed outline, and honestly, I never struggle with writer's block. I struggle with the internet and my desire to check my email every half hour.
I think we all do.
Yes. I would definitely be a more prolific writer if the internet didn't exist.
What is the best advice you have for writers who are trying to break into publishing?
Keep writing. If at any point along the way I'd stopped writing and I thought to myself, book number 11 is going to be my last, I wouldn't be published. I've written 13 books since I was 12 years old. And I know writers don't like to hear this, and they maybe think it is a good old boys club, but really there is no back door. There is no good old boys club. Good work sells, and if it doesn't, you write another one. And you look at someone like Janet Ivanovich, who went big with her Plum series, and then hauled out her older books that she wrote before that series and published them. So that's possible. Maybe your books will be published later. Maybe they won't be published at all. I know that mine will be hiding in my documents, my Word documents file on my computer, and I doubt that I'll ever haul them out.
Well, now, what is the best advice someone gave you about writing?
Probably it was my professor. I had a professor in college, and I went to him when I was a senior, and I told him, I think I want to get a PhD. And he said, I thought you want to write. And I said, well, yeah. And so I think I'll get a PhD. And he said, look, if you want to write, write. If you want to write about other people's writing, get a PhD. And he changed the course of my life. I decided instead that I would go into teaching. It gave me time to travel. It would give me time to write. And it would still keep me in a career that I would really enjoy. It would be reading and writing every day. And it was the best decision I ever made. Teaching high school English was amazing. It was fantastic. I still sometimes think about it when I'm at home by myself. I just sometimes think when it's really, really quiet and kind of lonely, I think, I wonder what I'd be teaching today. And not that being a full-time writer is in any way a bad choice. It's also fantastic. But both jobs have fantastic elements.
Well, describe your path to publication. Was it easy? Was it hard? You say you wrote 13 books before you published. Is that right?
I started at 12, so maybe those don't count. I don't know. It took me 15 years. My first attempt at getting published was when I was in, like I said, 7th grade, and I had written a big book, and my dad said, this is the best thing I've ever read. He was very good at doing that. Very good at boosting egos, so he had no idea how to go about getting something published, and neither did my mom. So I tripped down to Barnes & Noble, and I asked them, and they actually pointed me to a writer's market. And I started typing up letters to editors and agents. And some of them would actually write back, and I think that's probably because I told them I was 12. I had written something I wanted to publish, and that really inspired me. Getting those notes really I thought, there's a chance. And then after going on my archaeological dig during my second year of college, I changed my genre. I used to I had thought I was interested in maybe literary fiction or fantasy, and I realized I was actually interested in historical fiction. And that summer, I wrote a novel called Jezebel and signed on with quite a big agent. And his foreign rights department sold it to, as I had said before, Bertelsmann in Germany. And I had my first publishing credit. And so I thought, wow, this is excellent. Soon we'll come to sale to an American publishing house. But it never happened. And after about a year of his trying to sell Jezebel to somewhere, a house in America, I saw the writing on the wall. I was clear that I was going to have to write another book, and he gave me a topic he'd like to see, and I began my research. And over the next few years, I came to a pretty big realization, and that was no matter how many times I wrote to him, and no matter how many times I called, he would not answer my emails. So after I finished the book on the subject he'd suggested, he never replied again. And I thought, does this mean I don't have an agent? Have I been dumped because Jezebel didn't sell? And the answer is probably yes. So I took the high road, and I wrote a letter thanking him for what he did, and because he got my foot in the door. And I asked him to be released from our contract. I sent it by certified mail, and then I never heard from him again. But one thing I would advise aspiring authors is that publishing isn't personal. Rejection isn't personal. And so immediately I began sending out query letters the next month, and I told new agents that I'd parted ways with my previous agent, and I was searching for new representation. I didn't say any more than that. They could glean from it or research into it if they wanted to. And in a few weeks, I had a new agent. She is Anna Ghosh, who I'm still with, at Scoville Chitjack Gallen. And she took on the task of submitting the novel that my previous agent had suggested I write.
Oh, so, and how long did that take you to find a publisher? That book never sold. My heart really hadn't been in it. It was set in the 20th century, and my specialty, really, what I studied in college and what I've really since become an amateur historian on, is ancient Egypt and actually the Middle Ages. And we had quite a few near misses where editors wanted to purchase the book but were told no by the acquisitions committee, since all sales has to be approved by committee. And so after she sent the novel to all the major houses, I really began to panic. I thought, this is going to be a repetition of what happened to me last time, and I'm going to get dropped. So that's when I cast around and really thought hard and thought back to my trip to Berlin after my first archaeological dig. And I thought to that moment of seeing Nefertiti's bust and her amazing features and her gaze, that self-possessed gaze that I was talking about, and I thought, I want to write on her. And Anna waited for 2 years while I wrote on her. More than 2 years, actually, and eventually sold the book. She sold the book to Crown for, with the next book for 6 figures, and her foreign rights agent sold it to 15 countries. Yeah, she's a good agent. I believe I've met her. Well,
amazing.
How do you keep yourself inspired to write?
By reading. By reading. I'm always reading new biographies, by picking up quirky stories for my blog, which is called History Buff and centered on new archaeological discoveries, by visiting new archaeological sites on my travels. I'm always traveling. My husband and I try to visit at least 3 new countries a year. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but we try. And history stories are endless. You can find a great story anywhere. And it's true today. People are always wanting to tell you their story. Everybody has a backstory. Everybody has a fantastic story in their life. And that applied to people who lived 3,000 years ago as well. They had stories too, and it's just a matter of finding them.
Yes. Okay. Well, Michelle Moran, thank you so much for being with us today.